Welcome back to another exciting episode of Elm Elaborates. This is Season 2, Episode 17. We're going to do a deep dive into what we call here at the office post-mortems. Ryan, can you elaborate a little bit on what a post-mortem is?
Yes. So a post-mortem was developed basically because as you're going through a construction project, financials are flying all over as far as where we move money from this line item to that line item, when we got an actual loan versus what we actually got from the bank.
Okay.
Sometimes there's secondary loans and all that kind of stuff. And then there's just overall accounting things that happen that we just could never have expected.
Yeah.
So we realized when we close out a job that if we left it all maths out, right? All the maths out. But if we just close out that job and just left that math the way it is, if we look back in 6 months, we're going to be like, what happened? Why did we do this and that and all that kind of stuff? So what we do is we take a full breakdown of the budget where it landed on a construction project, and we dive into each line item and we explain how we got to that line item, what hiccups or hurdles caused us to get there, how we moved the money, what loan it came from, all these kinds of things to basically give somebody a great picture. If they look back and say, hey, how did we do this project and how much did it cost? You'll know based on our basically post-mortem deep dive into all the numbers. It's basically like forensic accounting.
Oh, I love forensic accounting.
Yes.
I mean, I would say that this is special to elm builders. One of the reasons why is just because when we find great deals, right, we don't like to pass on them. Sometimes the owners are like, we'll pay for that right now out of pocket, and then we'll go get a loan later, right?
Yeah.
Like they will buy something, and then they'll get a loan for the construction later, and then that's where we got to figure out, like, okay, what did we, like, how much did the owner spend on this? You know, where can we reimburse this, and where does all this, tidal wave of money go, and how much did it go to construction and all that?
In real estate, you got to be fast.
Yeah, especially commercial.
Yeah, so that's what's a benefit of having Nomad Capital and Elm Builders in the same arena, because they can be fast, we can be fast, and it's all well and good as long as we figure it out in the end and everybody receives their portion of whatever they paid and everything is trued up at the end.
Yeah.
And there's no problem with it. I mean, yes, it takes a little bit more work on the end, but if that makes or breaks a deal, I mean, we're gonna make that deal happen, and then we're just gonna figure it out in the end because we know we can. It just takes some time, and honestly, some of these things you couldn't even have fathomed that it was going to play out that way. So there's no point of just trying to be like, oh, well, that seems too hard. It's like, no, we'll just figure it out and we'll just take care of it at the end.
Yeah, so with the postmortem on our end, there's about 8 steps. I think it's like 8 steps.
Yeah.
We'll kind of go through each and every one. We'll talk about it a little bit and figure out, like, okay, that's what we do and that kind of makes sense. And this is how we come up with the postmortem. And then usually in the end, or not usually, but in the end, we then present it to the team, the owners and acquisitions, and let everyone know, hey, these are the true numbers here. This is where everyone's flushed out. Either it's City Storage that paid for something, or Nomad Capital, and where all the money went. The first one right now, I mean, it's a pretty simple one off the top of the head, and it's your purchase orders, right, which are your main contracts. Are they 100% invoiced? Are they paid out 100%? From your latest up-to-date check on it, as all the change orders are in, is everything paid? That should be the number one thing. Are the bills paid?
Surprisingly, sometimes subcontractors don't ask for all the money. Either they've forgotten,
it is very,
they don't have their insurance, so we haven't paid them because they don't have their updated insurance. They had insurance, but now it's outdated and we can't pay them.
Yep.
Or there was a change order that someone put to the side and they haven't really added it to the final bill, and that it's lingering. We know eventually they're going to ask for it, right? But we can't close out the project until everything is finalized out. Yeah. So if they have an invoice for it and it's been 7 weeks after the project, we know that invoice is going to come at some point, but we can't close the books because then it would be incomplete.
Yeah.
So that's when we go through all these 8 steps, and we're actively trying to get all of this stuff sourced from all our vendors and subs and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, you've done it at this point, right?
Yeah.
So how is that process? Do you go to Builder Trend and look through the financials?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. So through Builder Trend, you can actually sort by percentage, like, okay, what is 100% invoiced and what is 100% actually billed out. And, you know, when we first rolled out the postmortem, I was very confused on like, okay, why would someone not invoice? You know, they want all their money. But it's very surprisingly, as you get towards the end, you know, retainage was one of the big things, right? Like, especially... And as you get closer to the end, and you definitely talked about some change orders, you know, some of our change orders are like $435, right? So if someone in the office didn't add that, you know, there's this $435 that's just lingering out there that you're like, hey there.
Yeah.
I know I owe it to you. Do you know I owe it to you?
Yeah.
You know, I don't want, but I got to tell you, like,
yes.
Please invoice for this. But some of it is retainage, right? Like sometimes the sub does their own retainage. Sometimes they're expecting us to do it. And so it's just a whole thing. Like we want to make sure, but it's usually pretty simple, you know?
Yeah. It's usually not that hard.
Yeah. I talk to the site supervisors, make sure like, hey, is everyone finalized out? MEPs are pretty easy because, you know, we're waiting on warranty stuff to come in from them anyways. We're usually waiting on some type of lien release to come in. So there's a lot of communication. It's the smaller subs, you know, that's where a lot of communication needs to happen. And sometimes those active bosses or their estimators are actually their employees. So sometimes they got to work, you know, they're on a job site and then they're like, oh, I'm going to have to get to you like at 5 o'clock, you know, after I get off.
They don't have office staff.
Exactly.
They don't have the office staff. And honestly, we want to pay them. Like,
oh yeah. I want to know how much we saved.
We agreed for this amount. And sometimes when we're like, hey, we owe you $1,000, whatever it is. They're like, oh, thank you for my, like, yeah, we want to build those kind of relationships.
Oh, yeah.
There's no point of us trying to hold something back and be like, hey, they didn't remember.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not the right way to do business.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I definitely remember one of those situations on Kernersville.
Yeah. It's like,
yo, this is a big chunk of money here, guys.
It's like, hello.
Good catch. It's like, yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, I just saved you.
Yeah. It wasn't even a discussion if we were going to try to hold it back. It was like, how are they not asking for this? It's like, yeah. And they said, good catch. It's like, yeah dude, come on.
We're good, guys.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one, which we touched about it a little bit, is change orders. So on the actual verbiage, just like every change order was kind of thought out and has been invoiced or added to where it needs to go. Right.
Yeah.
I guess why is that important?
So change orders, sometimes subcontractors will add that to their original scope and they'll kind of tack it on to their base scope of their actual money allotted. And it's like, well, we want to know true change orders versus original scopes of work, because it's like, hey, if you're going to look back and it's like, hey, we had to paint all of the outside, right? Like we don't want all of the outside as a client add. Let's say the client added all of the outside to be painted. We don't want that to be in the original scope of work, because when someone asks about it, we want to be like, hey, remember we talked about only painting the inside and then you added the whole outside and that was an extra $35,000. Like that's why we went over on the paint line item, because you added that. So we want change orders to be identified as true change orders, just because forensic accounting, when you look back, there's an explanation. You know, it's like we went over by 30% on paint. Why did that happen? It's because you wanted to paint the whole outside of the building. Yeah. So it's like, it makes that explanation so much easier, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and why we do this is because we're trying to track our historical data, right? We're trying to make that as accurate as possible. So when in the future, when we go to a building and we know it's 42,000 square feet, we can pull up our numbers and say, for 42,000 square feet, this is how much it should cost. You know, if we have numbers that are skewed because of change orders or, a subcontractor then backed into the wall and we needed to repaint it. And now it's like, okay, why is this so high when it should be, that hurts us when really we can get something at a lower price, because that's what our historical data shows. But if we keep capturing all these little change orders that, some are niceties, some are just, accidents that should be charged against another vendor, we want to make sure that's accurate.
Yeah, and there, like you were saying, there's aesthetics and then there's functionality. It's nice to identify which one's like a basic need for a building to operate and function as it should. And then there's a whole other section where it's aesthetics, which is, it is valuable. Buyers will pay more for a building based on aesthetics, but we also have to put a number to that and be like, where do we want this building to fall on this aesthetic scale? Like, is it high? Is it low? Is it in the middle? And so these change orders will help us kind of identify what it would take to paint the whole outside of a building or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Another one, so I think number 3 is where we need to, we kind of take a step back because there are so many different companies, and there's, we have Nomad, we have City Storage, and we have ourselves, right? As we purchase, or as Nomad purchases the building, sometimes they pay for the utility tap fee. They pay for the electric to get turned on or switched over, or City Storage could do that. City Storage, they're eventually going to operate it. So during that time, they could pay all the fees to then get the permit or their electrical put in their name or the water in their name. And then Elm starts paying for some things. So then this is where the lines get screwed. And that's what the post-mortems for, is where we need to flush those out. Is okay, did City Storage pay for this tap fee, or did they pay for just the registration fee to put it in their name?
Yeah.
And then what's getting paid by the construction team?
Exactly. So like when we're talking about moving with speed, right? Sometimes we buy a building and the actual LLC that's going to be managing and running this building is not formed yet.
Yeah.
And we're not just going to stop and be like, you need to form that LLC. It's like, okay, this thing's like $2,000. Let's just pay the $2,000 and have this invoice waiting in the background that once they form the LLC, then we can tie it to that. Because in order to set up a utility account with a utility company, they want to see the LLC and the EIN number.
Yep.
If we don't have an EIN number, we can't possibly have an account and pay for this. So we have to just move with speed. It's like, hey, we want to power wash the building. Nobody's putting the water in their name, and we want to do that, next week. It's like, we're not going to wait for the attorneys to draft up an LLC and all that kind of stuff. It's like, let's just put the utility account in our name. We'll pay the bills, and then we'll send them a bill at the end of the project.
Yep.
So, I mean, again, it's what's so nice about having all the companies kind of all under the same roof. We can move with speed.
That's correct, yeah, and it's part of, I believe, the City Storage checklist to then get everything switched over. Because, as the construction is starting, we are focused on getting trades in there. It's one of those small details that you really don't think about until you get ready to pressure wash and you go, wait a minute, I don't have any water.
Yeah, I need that.
I guess we need that.
Yeah.
Why have we not been paying the fees? But it's always nice to then go back and be like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
City Storage has already hooked this up.
Also, this building has no windows, and we have to go inside, and we can't work with flashlights. So, yeah.
Just 3 days ago, I was flipping on switches. Now they don't work anymore.
Yes.
What happened?
What happened? Well,
who paid for that?
Yeah, it's the little things that'll get you tied up.
And it get you in the detail. All right, so now we're going on to number 4, which is
check items that were billed but scope of work not performed.
Correct.
So to put that in a more simple term and actually an applicable kind of example, we had a roof issue that we were trying to determine where the leak was coming from on the roof. And so we got word from our subcontractor that it was coming from the actual roof drains. So it was like, okay, we're probably going to need to replace all the roof drains. We hadn't been out on site yet. And it just so happened to line up that it was the 15th, and we do our bank draws on the 15th.
Yeah.
So they sent us an invoice. We were like, man, this roof leak's pretty bad. We're going to have to fix that. So we sent that invoice into the bank, and the bank paid that.
Gotcha.
So they paid it. So now we have all this money to repair the roof drains, right? So then we did our site walk and our investigation, and we realized those roof drains don't even go anywhere. It wasn't those roof drains. So now we got all this money for these roof drains that we don't need to repair. So we can't give the bank the money back, and we can't reverse the actual cost code that we applied it to. What we can do is, because we're going to need that money anyway, we just apply it to a different line. We spend that money on a different line item, like the actual roof itself where the leak was coming from. So instead of going back to the bank and saying, hey, we didn't need this money and all this and stuff, we're going to use that money anyway. We just called the roofer, applied that money to the roof, fixed the roof, and then we moved on. However, if you look back at that project, if we didn't correct that, you would be like, man, they spent $40,000 on the plumbing drain lines on the roof. Well, that's not correct. And that's why we do a post-mortem where we take that $40,000. It's like, no, we had to apply it to the roof. It was actually $60,000 to fix the roof. So we actually need an extra 20, that kind of stuff, where it's like, you're only going to see a roof line item for 20 and a plumbing for 40. And it's like, no, the whole 60,000 actually went to the roof. It's just, it just didn't play out that way. And so talking about historical data, we want that to all be accurate. So that's why during the postmortem, we true that up without creating this whole ruse with the bank and trying to figure this out and that out. It's like, no, we just use the money in a different spot and we moved on.
Especially doing what we do as a conversion team, that comes up a lot more often is because you're looking at your variance. Like when you do, like here at Elm, especially, we do our weekly check-ins, and we're always looking at the budget. So we're always like forecasting. We're always keeping our budget tight, because a lot of times with these old buildings, something can happen very quickly where you knock down a wall and there's like 8 other things that you were hiding behind that are now an issue, right? So like we're forecasting, and you get these bids, like, okay, this could be a future problem. Let me go ahead and get a quote for it. Okay, now I know for my budget down the road, I'm going to spend an extra $30,000 on this. I can go ahead and invoice for it. It's going to happen, and then it turns around like, okay, no, it's actually related to something else. Okay,
Yes.
so we've already invoiced $30,000, but now we need to figure out where. So I mean, it's definitely very common. I think it's happened so many times.
It's not like we're asking for money things that we don't actually need. It's just like if we get the money. And this maybe happens once or twice a project. If we get the money, we're just going to use it elsewhere. Like we know that we need it. And like we were talking about functionality versus aesthetics. Like let's say we got the building functioning perfectly and we didn't actually need that money. We're going to use that money on aesthetics because it does, up the value of the property. Mm-hmm. And there's always something we can improve on. And if we have the cash to do it, we're going to ask the client, which is Nomad Capital, and they're going to say, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Let's paint the elevators. Let's paint the stairs. Let's paint the handrails, that kind of stuff to make it more warm and inviting. So, yeah, it's just moving money to places and just tracking it all is what's super important.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right. Number 5, you think you can help me out with that one?
I can. It is tracking the supervision accurately.
Yeah, that's right.
So previously, if we had, let's say, $80,000 for a site superintendent. Mm-hmm. What we would do is, let's say, let's just make it $120,000 for just the simplicity of the math. Yeah, $120,000. Let's say it's a 12-month project.
Okay,
right.
Now I get it.
You take 120. You take 120, divide that by 12. That's $10,000 a month. That right.
Is.
So we would just bill $10,000 a month every month.
Correct.
The bank had no problem with that.
No problem.
And while that kind of makes sense, right? Because we said it was going to be $120,000, and we went through 12 months, and we had a site super there every month, right? We should get that. However, if we want historically accurate data, which we do, what we ended up doing more recently, probably on the past 2 or 3 projects, is we estimate what the supervision is going to take, and we always shoot over just a little bit, and then we apply our actual superintendent's pay stubs to that line item. So it's tracked. We know what we spent on supervision to the cent. Some other things, like when Cameron and I travel up to these job sites, we are supervising that job site for a day, and our travel and our hotel will go under that line item as well. So we know exactly what it takes to have an on-site superintendent and to have our project managers go up there roughly once a month, because all that stuff is tracked. Yeah. And then if you actually click on it, you can see how many hotel visits, all that kind of stuff. So that's what we started doing with the supervision, and that's how we track it, and that's how we do it with the postmortem.
Yeah, I mean, especially it's nice to know, as not all of our projects are here in North Carolina or in the general area, like somewhere in Georgia, So it's nice to know kind of how much you're going to be spending on either a site super being there the entire time, or 3 weeks out of the month, and going back home, and that travel back home, that's gas, right? That's gas mileage. You got to pay for all that. You got to pay for lodging. What's he paying for per diem? All this stuff needs to be tracked, especially, PMs going down there for site visits, whatever it may be. So it's just great information to have, especially as, we branch out and look at for other work in other states. And
and when you're saying that, I was thinking okay, your supervision costs in Kentucky is going to be far lower than your supervision costs in California or New York. So it's good to know that, again, going back to the historical data, if we do 5 projects in Kentucky and we have historical data on supervision and we try to use that in New York, that's not going to work.
Not going to work. Not going to work in Big Apple.
Yeah. So it's good to actually know what we spent instead of just throwing just a random number at it. Yeah. So the next one, Cameron, tell me about the next one. Is that number 7? 6?
Number 6. Number 6, it's going to be ensure that we got all our overhead and profit. I mean, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure we got all our money. Yep. And the only reason this gets tricky, right? Once again,
tell me about it.
Elm is moving. Elm, Nomad, City Storage. Everyone's moving at the speed of light, right? So sometimes, and our great team at Nomad and the acquisitions team, they're very crafty at what they do. They're very good at what they do. Yeah. So if they need to figure out how to close a deal, right? Sometimes it's taking a little bit of a line item
Yes.
and moving it into some type of funding to just close on the deal, right?
Yes.
So let's say, I mean, for instance, if we had 200,000 in contingency, right? That was 200,000 in our contingency budget, but Nomad needed 100,000 to close the deal. They're going to take that 100,000 out of contingency, and all that did is just shorten up our construction budget a little bit. But now we just need to make sure when we do our postmortem, like, hey, okay, where did that money go? Was our budget for construction this much, or was it supposed to be this much? Where did that money go? And that's all it is.
Yeah, sometimes the banks want to see it look a certain way.
Correct.
And it's like, again, we just know that at the end, we're just going to figure it out.
Yeah.
As long as the deal pencils, like, we'll play these games with the bank. It's like, okay, you want to see that 100,000 over here on this side of the on this side of the thing? Like, okay.
I mean, when we look at these sheets, it's like hard money cost, soft cost,
land acquisition cost.
Hell yeah.
Building value. And construction profit, all that kind of stuff. And again, it's not the same with any bank. It's like from bank to bank, it varies. And it's like, okay, we'll just slide this around, slide that around, and then we just make a note like, oh yeah, we'll do all that. But then, like, even if we forget, we have the postmortem, and it takes care of itself. Yeah. All right, the next one, number 7, is insurance.
Insurance.
So just like I was mentioning, maybe sometimes the LLC is not formed for city storage. Sometimes they form it super fast. We close on the building, and Elm Builders doesn't yet have builders risk insurance or their actual insurance for the building itself lined up. So city storage will jump in there and start paying for insurance for the building, because we can't leave a building sitting there not insured. So sometimes city storage will pay for that, and they really shouldn't. It should be on the builder to get their insurance in a timely manner and get all that stuff figured out. So if they make a payment or two on the insurance to keep the building safe, we'll credit that back to them. Yeah, so that's basically all that one is. And then the final one, number 8.
All right, number 8, I believe it's just check all your cost codes.
Yes.
Double check.
Check. What's a cost code?
Cost code is, that's a great question, Ryan.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So for a construction project, what we have, usually they all have a 3-digit number. Gosh, I forget. I did take a class on this. I did study this, but I forget what they call the system. It's like FSA or something like that, where...
I think it's a CSI.
So I knew it was initials. I knew it was initials. But pretty much they break it down into sections of the building and scopes of work into like a 3-digit number. So like 100s are usually most of your admin stuff. You're talking about your engineering, your supervision's under there, permitting, stuff like that. Your 200s are usually like your demo. 300s, site work. 400s, like exterior glazing, siding, stuff like that. 500 doors, 600 paint, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like then you get to 900, which is like your MISC materials, anything that doesn't fit in one of the previous ones.
Yeah,
but
there's sliding
so
scale.
many codes.
There's like 21.
So many codes.
The standard's 21. I think there's more than that.
Oh, there's so many codes. So each one of these line items, a bank wants to see where you're spending your money, right? So they're going to go, okay, we want to see what line items. So like storefronts, right? How much do you plan on spending in the storefronts for this building, right? So that's a line item, which has a cost code, which is called storefront, which is 500, 550 or something like that. So your whole project has that, and that's how your bank gets knows where all its money is going to go. And sometimes a surprise will happen, right? So you'll have one instance. There was a project that we had some chiller units that were in place. We thought we could keep them in place. Did some math on it and said, okay, we got to remove these units. We don't have a remove chiller unit cost code. So we're like, okay,
it doesn't exist. By the way,
where does this go? This went into MISC labor. So once again, that's why this postmortem is so important, is because our MISC labor went from, like, I think we're going to spend $20,000 in there to a whopping $68,000. It's like, okay, now for historical data, why did your MISC labor on this relatively small project end up being so much? That would skew your numbers huge.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong answer. We could have put that in HVAC,
correct,
and then our HVAC would have been $68,000 over. So the postmortem is kind of just a way to kind of, again, just identify why that happened. Yeah. And then so we just break it out separately and be like, well, $68,000 was to move the chillers and do a glycol refrigerant line and all that kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things that it's great to like go back and recap a project because, at the beginning of a project, we all have this grand idea of like what we're going to do and how it's going to happen and how much it's going to cost. And then when we actually break down, say, okay, what did we spend a lot of time looking at and rethinking about and doing a lot of change orders on, right?
Yeah.
So like, okay, next time, okay, we really need to hone in on electrical a little bit more and kind of look at those plans a little bit more to say, okay, because last project we had quite a bit of change orders on that. Like now let's learn lessons learned here and move forward and really focus on that. Or chiller units. Next time we see chiller units in a building, we're gonna be like, nah, we're going to probably end up moving those, or do the cost comparison up front and go, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and another thing that comes to mind is like an elevator. If we did another personnel elevator, we could look back at Lexington's historical data, right, and be like, okay, we know what we spent on the elevator, we know what we spent on the walls, the fire rated walls, all that kind of stuff. But not only that, we could look at the change orders that we spent on the overtime to pay those guys to work the weekends. Remember that?
Oh,
and it's like, okay, if we did that in 10 months, if we have a job where we have a 14-month timeline, it's like, okay, we probably won't need that change order for the overtime because we did it in 10 with a little bit of overtime. Like 14 months, we probably won't need overtime. But if the timeline is 6 months, it's like, oh, wow, we're going to need a lot of money in overtime to pay these guys. Yeah. So that's kind of like how that also would help us.
And it's a great tool for our customer, right? Like it helps us track like, okay, why did this project go over on some items? Well, there's a lot of customer changes here. Like next time, let's look at like one thing you guys really like to do is change your office layout, or you guys want a generator. So that was one thing that we're like, okay, from historical data, we're like, let's just add those line items. So then we ended up adding a generator line item, an office.
So it's not a surprise.
Yeah, it's not a surprise. It's like, let's just put money in the line for that. And hey, that's what we did.
Awesome. So those are the 8 steps.
Those are the 8 steps.
So there's literally a spreadsheet, and at the very top, they used to be at the bottom, and then I realized you would do the spreadsheet and go to the bottom, and then you'd see them. I think at the beginning it only started with like 4 or 5 items, and then we've since added. So we put them at the top, so you do the steps first, and then you go through the whole spreadsheet and do that, because if you do it in the inverse, it's not very time efficient because you got to redo it. So those tips are written at the top, and I think it's a great tool. Like we've been mentioning, we talked about this whole time. It's just it's a great way to know what happened, why it happened, and how much it cost.
Yeah. The fun thing is just trying to find the time to do it.
Yes.
And then you have to stand up there and present your findings.
Yeah, so I don't think we mentioned how often we do a post-mortem. I know for people that don't know this, like how often would you do this?
At the end of every project.
Just once.
Just once at the end of every project. That is what we call, the post-mortem after everything is finalized. Just like, okay, let's take a look back at this project.
Yes.
And then...
we do budget reviews every week, but like this in-depth analysis, this financial stuff, you really only need to do it once.
Correct.
Just to close out the project.
Yeah. But it lives on forever.
It does live on forever.
Because if everyone wants to go back and like, hey, why was Lexington so cheap? Or why did the Lexington elevator? And they go, oh, go check out the post-mortem.
Yeah.
Bada bing.
It'll tell you everything.
Tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, we didn't need to do the roof. That's why.
Didn't need to do the roof.
It's
a beautiful building.
Yeah, the floors looked great.
We had a tenant.
Yeah. So we only do it once. So the project closes, let's say, January 1st. When do you do the post-mortem? January 2nd?
My boss would like it 6 to 8 weeks later, because that's usually how long it takes to gather all the information. It does take a while, especially lien releases, your warranty information, cross-referencing, saving all that warranty, because sometimes those vendors are getting that stuff at the very end as well. And then just making sure all your last invoices are actually rolling, because once again, sometimes it is very tricky to get your trades.
To the
just
finish.
Like, come on, dude, send that invoice in.
Yeah.
And then usually at the end, someone's number's off. Like, okay, and it could be like 3 cents, right? Like, it's like, okay, but where did that 3 cents
Not only that, it's like I've got an invoice after, and it's like, painted the hallways for $5,000. It's like, we didn't even paint the hallways. Like, you didn't, yes, we agreed at some point that maybe you might paint the hallways, but remember we said that we weren't going to paint the hallways, and it's not like our subs are doing that maliciously. It's just like they forgot. Like, they already had the invoice and they sent it. It's like, no, we didn't paint the hallways, remember? So there's a lot of that stuff too.
Yeah, and a lot of little things at the very end where you have now, Cindy Storage, who's about to take over, finally looks at something and goes, okay, maybe, we have enough in contingency. Can we just go ahead and knock this out real quick? I mean, subs are still, on the job site, so it's very easy to get it done and over with. So you try to just go ahead and knock some of those things out, last minute invoices, stuff like that.
Can we add a door here? Can we do
fire
this?
inspections, annual reports, safety reports. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things at the very end. That 6 to 8 weeks goes by so quick.
Fast.
You're like, how was that 8 weeks with that project? I mean, I feel like I'm still on it.
I know. Yeah.
It needs to be 6 to 8 weeks from the last invoice. But that's not the case. It's from CO.
Yes.
So that's where it's like,
yeah,
dang it.
Put the pressure on.
Yeah, you sure do.
All right. So that's our post-mortem.
That's it.
That's the reasons why we do it. That's how we do it. I think.
Love them.
Yes.
It's all good information to have.
It's very helpful, especially we're doing a lot of these projects.
Yeah.
So all good stuff to know. Well, thanks for joining us. That was season 2, episode 17, a deep dive into what we call a post-mortem.
Thanks for joining.